there, that it was this government changing the rules in the middle of the process, adding additional conditions that prevented that from going forward. And of course, we've seen their failures thus far with respect to the Trans Mountain pipeline as well. And this is really having a chilling effect on development, and I'll look forward to continuing these remarks after question period.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, will have 7 minutes remaining in his speech following question period. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. The honourable member for Brampton West.
Mr. Speaker, my riding of Brampton West is home to many small businesses. These businesses provide jobs to help people from all walks of life and are the backbone of our economy. A few weeks ago, I was proud to welcome the Minister of Small Business and Export Promotion to my riding to meet with small business owners and talk about how our government is supporting them. We had the opportunity to visit Jem's House of Jerk, a Caribbean-inspired restaurant with 4 locations around Brampton, serving the community for 27 years. There we met the owner, Lloyd McDowell, better known in the community as Jem, who started this business just at the age of 19. We heard about the business's success and discussed our government's priorities over a plate of delicious jerk chicken. With lower taxes for small businesses and investments into the middle-class Canadians made by our government, I know Jem's House of Jerk will be around for years to come, serving up thousands of plates of delicious Caribbean delights. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable député de Stormont-Dundas.
The honourable member for Stormont-Dundas, South Glengarry.
The riding of Stormont-Dundas, South Glengarry, say goodbye to Jerry Benson, a figure who has contributed much to our community over the years. Jerry was a very successful business person, employing over 1,000 individuals. But Jerry was also a very generous man. His passion for giving back to his community was well known. His charity golf tournament has raised over $500,000 that were donated to local charities. Jerry also had a passion for education and making sure that those living in Stormont-Dundas, South Glengarry had access to world-class educational opportunities. His legacy will live on through the St. Lawrence College Automotive Training Facility, the University Credit Transfer Agreements he helped to broker, and the creation of the Cornwall Innovation Centre. He will be deeply missed by his community, but more importantly, his wife Claudette, his children Marty, James, Kelly, and 6 grandchildren. Thank you, Jerry, for everything you have contributed to our community over the years. You will be greatly missed. Thank you.
The honourable member for Calgary Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I announced $21 million investment in 16 Alberta businesses, with 11 in Calgary alone. The money will help them scale up and create jobs and get their products to market faster, both at home and abroad. The Calgary companies receiving support are AIMCO, Antibiotics, Enersoft, Flight Aerospace Solutions, Kent Imaging, Nanalysis, PK Sound, QuirkLogic, Recover Energy Services, Useful Corporation, and Virum. These investments are coming through our Western Innovation Initiative Fund, a program that proves our commitment to ensuring that Alberta businesses can achieve even greater success. It's just another example of our federal Liberal government and how we are investing in creating jobs and diversifying our economy.
Honourable member for Vancouver East.
I'm very excited to share in this House the excellent work that Urban Native Youth Association is doing in my riding of Vancouver East. Formed in 1988, Anya serves as one of 4 Vancouver's youth hubs. Is also partnered with over 265 community organizations. Is widely recognized for its excellent programming, strong youth engagement, fiscal responsibility, and financial stability. Anya's forging ahead their plan to develop a Native Youth Centre at the corner of Hastings and Commercial. The 48,000 square foot space will eventually host 14 of Anya's 20 programs and house a suite of facilities, including a library, computer lab, gym, social enterprise cafe, spiritual space, arts and cultural rooms, community kitchen, and more. Adjacent to the site is the complementary and critical housing component. Realizing this dream will require collaboration and support from all levels of government. In particular, federal infrastructure funding is needed, and I call on the federal government to commit to investing in this project.
The honourable member for Humber River Black Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today in my role as the chair of the Parliamentary Friends of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat Friendship Group. The work of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Jamaat in Canada has always had a peaceful message of love for all and hatred for none. This initiative is part of an ongoing effort undertaken to showcase the peaceful nature and beauty of their faith while continuing to call on global powers to advance an agenda of peace, religious freedom, and the advancement of human rights in Canada and around the world. I encourage all members of Parliament to join me tonight at the third Speaker Series event to learn more. I'm very fortunate to have many Ahmadiyya community members in my riding of Humber River Black Creek, and I am blessed to enjoy a wonderful friendship with them all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, many jurors suffer from mental health issues arising from their jury service, and yet they're prevented from getting the full mental health supports that they require because of the jury secrecy rule, which prohibits jurors from disclosing their experiences during the jury deliberation process for life, even to a mental health professional. My private member's bill C-417 would change that. Consistent with the unanimous recommendation of the Justice Committee, it would carve out a narrow exception to the rule so that jurors could disclose their experiences to a mental health professional post-trial in a totally confidential setting. It protects the integrity of the jury secrecy rule while allowing jurors to get the help that they need. Mr. Speaker, I urge the speedy passage of Bill C-417.
The honourable member for La Salle, Aymar Verdun. Mr. Speaker, on November 23rd last, the third edition of Eco 2 Fest, which was held for the first time in Verdun, ended. It's a festival that brings together different disciplines and sectors of activity in an exploratory approach to new forms of economy and design.
The Eco 2 Fest team brought together people from all over Montreal, with many directly from Verdun, to discuss important topics such as the future of the collaborative economy, public policies, housing, and urban agriculture. J'ai eu le plaisir, Monsieur le
Mr. Speaker, I had the pleasure of contributing to the programming by participating in the roundtable, How Public Policies Should Support Responsible Progress.
Set up a co-working space, an exchange space, and a Fab Lab maker space in the heart of Verdun, in the basement of Notre-Dame des Sept Douleurs Church, creating a new public space for citizens of all ages to come and meet and discover new technologies. Mr. Speaker, come visit Verdun.
The honourable member for Thérèse de Blainville. Mr. Speaker, today we celebrate International Day of Persons with Disabilities throughout the world. On this day, we promote the rights and welfare of disabled persons of every walk of life, and we raise awareness of their particular situation in all aspects of their political, social, economic, and cultural lives. This year, the focus is on the empowerment of the disabled so they can live inclusive, fair, and sustainable lives. In that regard, I'd like to recognize the work done by the Association for the Hearing Impaired of the Laurentides. For 30 years now, it's been working tirelessly to improve the lives of people with hearing problems in our region. I'd also like to pay tribute to the volunteers, and in particular, I'd like to congratulate Ms. Marilyn Laurier, Director General, for her relentless work in support of the hearing impaired in our area. Thank you very much. The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, do you know how much the Prime Minister's Welcome to Canada tweet is costing Canadians? Well, it's $1.1 billion, and that billion, in fact, should go towards reducing wait times for companies in Lévis, Bellechasse, and Les Etchemins who are grappling with a serious problem. They can't find enough foreign workers, and they desperately need them. But there are longer and longer delays for people following the rules. Delays have gone from 3 to 24 weeks, Mr. Speaker, almost 6 months under the Liberals. And this states the obvious: there are jobs, but not enough people to fill them. With an unemployment rate of 2.4% in Chaudière-Appalaches, it's clear instead of investing in illegal migration, as is the case under the Liberals, and instead of penalizing companies, we have to help them.
Mr. Speaker, on Friday I met with Peel HIV/AIDS Network to discuss how we can do more. Together we recognize World AIDS Day on December 1st. HIV, the virus that causes AIDS, is one of the world's most serious public health challenges. Since the beginning of the AIDS epidemic, more than 70 million people have been affected. Today there are approximately 36.7 million people living with HIV and AIDS in the world. World AIDS Day is a day of remembrance and rededication. It is a day for remembering those who have lost their lives and loved ones. It is a day to be grateful for those who continue to provide care and employment and hope for those with HIV and AIDS. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Mount Royal.
Mr. Speaker, Sunday night was the first night of Hanukkah, the festival of lights that commemorates the victory of the Maccabees and the subsequent miracle of rededicating the Holy Temple in Jerusalem and restoring its menorah. Pendant 8 jours,
For 8 days, Jews from all over the world will celebrate by lighting a Hanukkah and eating and playing games with their families and friends.
Of this festive season, we still remember those massacred in Pittsburgh last month and take note of the rising rates of anti-Semitism in Canada and across the world. And intolerance today is by no means confined to anti-Semitism. I call on all members of this House to work together on a plan of action to combat hate, including online hate. Canadian Jews, seeing their leaders taking concrete measures to combat bigotry, would be the best Hanukkah present of all. Thank you.
Honourable member for Lethbridge.
Mr. Speaker, at the G20 summit, the Prime Minister talked about the so-called social impacts that male construction workers have on rural areas. He suggested that hardworking blue-collared men are dangerous and a threat to the well-being of our communities. I have a lot of these men in my riding, Mr. Speaker, and so I'd like to talk about the impact that they have. They leave tips at our restaurants, our barbershops, and with our drivers. They fill up their trucks at gas stations, they buy coffee from the local Tim Hortons, and they sleep in our hotels. They take care of their families, they pay their taxes, they build roads, bridges, schools, hospitals that we use each and every day. Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister wants to talk about men who have a negative impact on rural communities, he should look no further than the person in the mirror. My riding, and indeed all of Canada, would benefit greatly, Mr. Speaker, if he addressed the problem staring back at him.
Honourable member for London West.
Mr. Speaker, today is the United Nations International Day of Persons with Disabilities. This year's theme, Empowering Persons with Disabilities and Ensuring Inclusiveness and Equality, is at the heart of the Government of Canada's commitment to build a Canada without barriers. In June, our government introduced Bill C-81, the Accessible Canada Act, which, if passed, will address barriers to accessibility in the federal jurisdiction. Earlier today, the Minister of Public Services and Procurement and Accessibility announced that Canada has acceded to the optional protocol to the UN's Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This means that Canadians will have additional recourse if they believe their rights under the Convention have been violated. These actions speak to our dedication to creating a truly inclusive and accessible Canada. Please join me in celebrating people with disabilities and the significant contribution they make to Canadian society. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Windsor-Tecumseh.
When the Liberals began negotiating NAFTA in 2017, they promised to defend dairy, poultry and egg farmers, to bring in progressive measures like gender rights, labor rights, an Indigenous chapter, and stronger environmental protections. We know now that the final deal, Canada lost out on all these fronts. NAFTA 2.0 also makes medications even more expensive. The extension of patents on specific drugs means costs for people living with rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, and other chronic conditions will increase. Hello? Anybody in there? Canadians are calling for a national pharmacare plan. This deal makes it more expensive to implement. We in Windsor and Essex County know the hard reality of trade agreements, negotiated in haste to advance a corporate agenda. It appears this government has learned nothing. It's time we change how these deals are done. It's time we put people first. It's time multinationals, banks, and...
The honourable member for Prince Albert.
I rise today to pay my deepest respect to the Bush family on the passing of a great friend to Canada, the 41st President of the United States, George Herbert Walker Bush. President Bush had a long, successful record of serving the American people before taking his chair in the Oval Office. His strong leadership would help end communism in the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union would collapse as the world winds of freedom and democracy blew across Eastern Europe and Ukraine. It was President Bush and former Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney who spearheaded the North American Free Trade Agreement. In 1992, he called the agreement a beginning of a new era. And a new era it was, Mr. Speaker. It was a partnership and a friendship that benefited all three countries. At the completion of his term, Bush left a letter in the Oval Office for incoming President Bill Clinton. In it, there was no hostility, no animosity, no name-calling, just encouragement, kindness, and well wishes.
Hear, hear.
Bush was always a gentleman who brought an honor to the office in which he served. On behalf of the Conservative Party, may I offer all Americans our sincere condolences.
Hear, hear.
The honourable member for Ottawa-Vanier. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last Saturday, a wave of collective mobilization was felt in 40 communities in Ontario and 9 across Canada. Even the Franco-Ontarian flag was flying in the National Assembly in Quebec City, a unanimous gesture of solidarity. Over 14,000 people came out to demonstrate against the cuts announced by the Ford provincial government to remove the Commissioner of French Language Services and the University of French Ontario. It's clear that from now on, December 1st will be recorded in our history books and that all generations, including thousands of young people, were there, all united, all together, speaking with one voice.
Of solidarity across Ottawa, Ontario, and Canada to defend official languages and respect for minority rights. It was amazing to see so many Franco-Ontarian flags in Ottawa. Et ce n'est pas terminé. La lutte...
And it's not over. The struggle continues. The movement of La Résistance is in full swing. We are, we will be.
Questions orales. Oral questions. The honourable member for Carleton.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has lived a celebrity lifestyle off of his family fortune, and now he's trying to build that celebrity lifestyle off of Canadians' tax dollars. He's sending out tweets to win celebrity friends. Meanwhile, at home, the working people back home who pay the bills are under attack by his No More Pipelines Bill C-69. The NDP government in Alberta, the Pipelines Association, and the TransCanada Pipeline Company have all called for the government to withdraw this bill. Will they withdraw the No More Pipelines Bill C-69?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we inherited a very flawed process of environmental review from the previous government. That has led to failure of a number of infrastructure projects, including pipelines, that could not move forward. We are focused on fixing that flawed process by having Bill C-69 that allows good projects to move forward, that allows one review for every project. That's what we're focused on. That's what we will continue to deliver.
Honourable member for Carleton.
Well, at a glitzy international conference last week, the Prime Minister attacked energy workers, saying that male construction workers go to rural communities and cause negative social and gender impact. Now, while he's trying to build his international celebrity abroad, he's killing the livelihoods of working Canadians back at home. His No More Pipelines Bill C-69 has been condemned by the industry, the Alberta government, and numerous Aboriginal communities. Will he finally scrap his No More Pipelines Bill C-69.
Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it is that kind of divisive politics that has put under this place to the start with. Pitting one community against the other, pitting indigenous communities against other communities. Bill C-69 allows us to have a process in place that will allow good projects to move forward in a timely and efficient manner. We are focused on expanding our non-U.S. global market, and we're focused on building pipelines that allow us to do that, and Bill C-69 is the process to get us there. Thank you, Mr.
Honourable Member for Carleton.
And that they would dare talk about divisive rhetoric after this Prime Minister, the limousine Liberal, went down to Argentina at an international conference while our workers are struggling at home, and he insults them and accuses them of creating negative social and gender impacts. That is absolutely disgusting and appalling, and the first thing this government should do is apologize for that despicable rhetoric. When will they apologize for insulting working men and women and scrap this No More Pipelines Bill C-69?
Order. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the record of the previous government, how they failed to protect the energy sector and how they failed to expand our non-U.S. global market. When they got into office in 2005, 99% of Alberta's oil was exported to the United States. When they left office in 2015, 99% of Alberta's oil was still exported to the United States. That is the failure of that government, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Député.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, the National Post is reporting that the City of Brampton asked the RCMP to investigate a troubling situation. 2 Liberal members, including the Minister of Innovation, were privy to confidential information about the price the city had offered the Ontario government for a land purchase. What happened, Mr. Speaker? A private company bought the land and flipped it for a tidy profit. So my question to the Minister is simple. What is his connection to the directors of that company? The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, the allegations that the member opposite is making are categorically false. If he has the courage of his convictions to make these allegations, I strongly recommend he goes outside the House to make these same remarks, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable. Order. Order.
Order. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, I can understand why the minister is on the defensive like that. If he has nothing to be ashamed of, why doesn't he answer the question? At least one director took part in the Prime Minister's ill-fated trip to India. The minister even had his picture taken with one of the company's directors. And get this, that person was a former Liberal Riding Association president. Several directors have made donations to the Liberal Party. So my question is simple. Did the RCMP contact the minister about this investigation? And if so, when? The Honourable Government House Leader. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. All reports suggesting that the minister committed some kind of wrongdoing are false. And if the member has the courage of his convictions, he should repeat those remarks outside the House. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Rimouski, Nejet, Témiscouata, Basque. From 2014 to 2016, the U.S. got around our supply management system by exporting diafiltered milk to Canada. Despite annual losses of over $200 million for our producers, the Liberals didn't lift a finger to help our producers. Our producers had to take charge and make a deal with the major processors, creating a new class of milk, Class 7. But by signing the deal with the U.S., the Liberals have undone all this work and caved into Trump, giving unlimited access to the Canadian market for high-protein milk coming from the U.S.? Are the Liberals going to provide compensation to dairy farmers for this sabotage too? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
The government defended the supply management system against a government, a U.S. government who indicated it wanted to dismantle it. We know that our dairy, poultry and egg farms provide the highest quality of products to Canadians at a reasonable price and take care of our rural communities. We are committed to fully and fairly supporting our farmers to make sure they continue to expand in this country. We have and will continue to support our dairy farmers, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Rimouski-Neigette-Témiscouata-Les-Basques.
Milk is outside the supply management system.
The announced closure of the GM plant is devastating for the families of the 2,500 workers and their community. But it's not just families in Oshawa who are concerned about their future. Workers in the auto sector are concerned all across the country. The Prime Minister has to do more than simply express disappointment. He has to show leadership by the end of this week or next week and hold an emergency meeting of the auto sector with unions, industry provinces, and mayors of communities whose economies depend on the auto sector. Will he do that? The Honourable Minister of Innovation. Mr. Speaker, the auto sector remains strong. It's well positioned to build the cars of today and tomorrow. And we will always stand beside our auto sector and our workers. And we are going to continue to work with the auto sector, and we will continue to defend our workers.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is in Oshawa today with auto workers after GM has turned their back on them. The GM plant closure is devastating for the families of 2,500 workers and for thousands more whose livelihoods have depended on that plant for 100 years. The Liberals have yet to act. No emergency plan, no emergency meetings. What is this Prime Minister waiting for? GM didn't build Oshawa, Oshawa built GM, and it's time to fight for good jobs. Will the Liberals listen to the NDP and call for an urgent meeting with industry, labour and all of government to find solutions to fight for these jobs?
Hear, hear. Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, of course, this is disappointing news for Oshawa. And the reason why it's so disappointing, as the member opposite has mentioned, is because Oshawa has a long and proud history when it comes to General Motors, over 100 years. That's why we've actually worked with GM and we're working with the unions as well. I've spoken with the local municipal leadership, spoken with my provincial counterpart as well, because GM has made a big mistake by turning its back on the workers in Oshawa. We will not make that mistake. We'll continue to defend the auto workers and we'll continue to support this very important sector.
Oh, member for Essex.
Well, if the Liberals want to see a leader in this House that defends workers, they should call the by-election. Just last week, with the stroke of a pen, this Prime Minister made it clear that it's more important to please Donald Trump than to protect Canadians. This is shameful. He signed an agreement without removing Trump's tariffs on steel and aluminum that threatened thousands of jobs, and a deal that compromises Canadian sovereignty over our dairy industry, giving the U.S. power to interfere in the regulation of our supply-managed system. This is wrong. Why is the Prime Minister so willing to sacrifice so much to Donald Trump?
The Honourable Minister.
But behind closed doors, they admit that this is a deal to protect Canadian jobs. The NDP leader celebrated the deal during a recent event in Ottawa, and the NDP member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie, who is also the NDP Quebec lieutenant, called the new NAFTA the best deal possible. We will continue to fight for good Canadian jobs, and that's exactly what we did over the weekend, and we'll continue to be doing in the next future.
Honourable member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, it's getting to the point where we need a criminal investigation flowchart to understand the relationships between a Liberal MP, a Liberal minister, the Prime Minister, a clutch of Liberal financial supporters, and 3 RCMP investigations. Now we learn the City of Brampton wants the Mounties to investigate a land deal after confidential information was allegedly passed to the member for Brampton East and the Minister of Economic Development. Mr. Speaker, it's time for the Liberals to drop the "we don't comment on RCMP investigations" stalling and tell Canadians the truth.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I have said, any insinuation of wrongdoing by the Minister of Innovation is absolutely false, and repeating it outside this chamber will be met with a strong response from the Minister's lawyer. If that member has the courage
Order. The honourable member for Thornhill.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let's get specific. The Prime Minister's office now says the PM didn't invite any of the business people who joined his ill-fated trip to India. The member for Brampton East, who said he would resign because of gambling addiction and didn't, says he didn't invite a director of the Goreway Heaven Company involved in the suspect Brampton real estate deal. And the Economic Development Minister claims ignorance of it all. Mr. Speaker, again, will the Liberals at least tell us who invited the Goreway Heaven execs on the Prime Minister's trip to India?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
How quickly we see a change of channel from that member, because he knows he can make comments inside this House where he's protected by privilege, but he will not make those comments outside of this place where he is not protected. When it comes to the member's question, Mr. Speaker, it is the NSI-COP, the National Security of Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarian that we know is studying this issue. It would be inappropriate to comment on this issue until the report is tabled. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. One at a time. Order. Order.
The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, a very shady story is swirling around the Liberal member for Brampton East. Very close connections to a private company's nebulous land deals are feeding the controversy and confusion. Mr. Speaker, why was one of this company's directors coincidentally along for the ride on the Prime Minister's ill-fated India trip? And who invited him at taxpayer expense? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the member said that he was dealing with certain problems and he was seeking help from mental health practitioners, and he is no longer a part of the Liberal caucus. We hope he will get the support he needs, and to answer the question, the member must be aware that we cannot comment on a report that has not been tabled in the House. The honourable member for Lévis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, now that this story is out in the open, the Prime Minister's office denies having invited the executive along on the trip, and so does the member for Brampton East. And yet, all these people did indeed take part in the Prime Minister's India trip. Mr. Speaker, this ping-pong game has to stop. Canadians are entitled to know who invited this private company executive along on the Prime Minister's VIP India trip. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians has studied this issue, and it would be inappropriate to comment until that report is tabled. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
The Prime Minister now admits that he and his office were well aware that the Liberal MP for Brampton East was under police investigation for months, yet the Prime Minister kept him in the Liberal caucus and kept him on the Finance Committee while they were performing a critical study on proceeds of crime legislation. In fact, this Liberal MP was the subject of 2 RCMP investigations and another one from the Ontario Provincial Police. Why did it take 3 police investigations before the Prime Minister finally stopped covering for the Liberal MP for Brampton East?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I have mentioned, the member told us that he is addressing certain challenges and is receiving treatment from a health professional. Mr. Speaker, you have been informed that he is no longer a member of the Liberal caucus. We hope that he receives the support that he needs. I'm not sure where the comments come from the members opposite, but it's clear that they don't recognize that when it comes to our security agencies, when it comes to the RCMP, when it comes to police investigations, they occur independently of government. Government does not tell them who to investigate. Obviously, it's a different approach from the Conservatives. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Chilliwack Hope.
Well, speaking of national security advisors, Mr. Speaker, Dick Fadden, the former national security advisor to this Prime Minister, told the media that he had a great deal of difficulty believing that no one in the PMO was aware of these investigations into the Liberal MP for Brampton East. The Prime Minister now admits he knew for months that a sitting Liberal MP was under investigation, and that investigation now involves national security, drug money laundering, and international terrorism. So the question is, why did the Prime Minister cover up for this Liberal MP for so long?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as I have stated inside this House and as we have stated outside this House, it was less than 2 weeks ago that we were notified of any concerns. The member came to us, let us know that he was dealing with certain challenges. When it comes to the RCMP, they work independently of the government. We do not undermine our security officials. We do not undermine officers of Parliament like the Conservatives used to do. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
You know, Mr. Speaker, rather than threatening MPs with lawsuits, maybe Liberals should try answering some questions in this place. While tragic gambling problems do not launch ethics investigations, nor do they have you tailed by the RCMP. In a confessional video released by the member from Brampton East, more questions were raised than were answered. Troubling behaviour from this MP going back months raised red flags for the RCMP, but apparently not for the Liberals. This whole scandal asked disturbing questions about the Prime Minister's own competence. How is it possible that Conservative senators in the entire media gallery know more about this issue than the Prime Minister's own office did?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that member, as I have said before, has been in this place for a long time, and he should know very well that when it comes to the RCMP, they work independently of the government. We respect the work that the RCMP will do. We have no doubt that they will ask the right questions, find the right solutions. We will not speculate, as the Conservatives and the NDP have partnered on this issue. When it comes to this member's issues, we know that they are grave issues, and we hope that he receives the support that he needs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hello. Order. Order. The Honourable Member for Timmins, James Bay.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the member for Brampton East is providing us with more plot twists and binge night on Netflix. But it's the drama concerning the Minister of Innovation that concerns me, particularly whether insider information was used in a land deal that went down with Gorway having a company with deep ties to the Liberal Party who were also on that disastrous India trip. And it's reported that the City of Brampton has taken the extraordinary step of referring this issue to the RCMP. So to reassure the House, will the Minister tell us whether or not his name has been referred to the RCMP? It's a simple question.
Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, any innuendos or allegations made by the member opposite are categorically false. The member full well knows that he's making these allegations in this House where he has parliamentary privilege. If he wants to make the same remarks, I recommend he makes them outside the House, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Deputy.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Mr. Speaker, it's here that we should tell the truth, talk, straight talk. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, the Liberal government is going to spend $1.1 billion to manage the illegal immigration crisis at our border, not to mention the hundreds of millions it owes Quebec. The crisis is the direct result of the Prime Minister's January 2017 tweet encouraging illegal immigration. What is the Prime Minister waiting for? When is the safe third country loophole going to be dealt with? The Honourable Minister of Government Affairs. Mr. Speaker, my colleague knows that the government is working hard with our security services and the government of Quebec to take care of the situation of refugee claimants. We know that the number is going down, and my colleague knows that we have responsibilities in international law. Canada intends to meet those commitments and ensure that Canadians are still safe. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-l'Érable. Well, what this government is going to do is erase Canada's borders. The Border Service recently admitted that they'd only intercepted 3% of dangerous goods entering Canada. Then the bill will be $1 billion for Canadians. When is the minister going to focus on our borders instead of further erasing them by signing this UN Global Compact on migration? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, despite the Conservative rhetoric about refugee claimants, we should point out that about 40% of people crossing the Canadian border are children. The Conservative penny-wise, pound-foolish approach was to drastically cut Border Services Agency, and they should be ashamed asking us this kind of question with their record.
Hill.
Mr. Speaker, there's a problem with the Liberals giving Canadians false assurances that the UN Global Compact for Migration is non-binding. Non-binding agreements can become customary international law and inform interpretation of domestic law. This means Canadian judges can cite this declaration in their decisions. After spending $1.1 billion on illegal border crossers, will the Prime Minister reverse his policy of border erasure and refuse to sign the UN Global Compact on migration?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of the fact that the Global Compact on Migration is an example of Canadian leadership abroad. Most of the document is based on best practices from Canada. It is about the orderly management of migration. It is about recognizing Canada's success on integration and settlement. Only a conservative with a broken immigration record would find a problem with us sharing our best practices with the world. When it comes to making sure that we export the privately sponsored refugee program or our success with economic immigration, we will sign the agreement.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Spending $1.1 billion on people who illegally enter the country from the safe spaces of New York should be a best practice that Canada does not export anywhere. Mr. Speaker, the idea that Canada's immigration policy can be informed or controlled by something outside of our nation should be a grave concern, and given the Prime Minister's demonstrated inability and unwillingness to secure our borders. Will the Prime Minister today reverse his border erasing policy and withdraw Canada from the UN Global Compact?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Our record speaks for itself. Faster processing of spousal sponsorships, reuniting more families than ever before, making sure that we invite people to become Canadian citizens when they've contributed so much to this country. What is despicable is the record of that party, cutting refugee health care, putting obstacles against people who wish to become Canadian citizens, bragging about Yazidis when they only had 3 Yazidis in Canada. We have the record to prove, Mr. Speaker. Let them have the talking points.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Mr. Speaker, in Paris, the Liberals committed to greenhouse gas reduction to hold temperature increase to 1.5 degrees. Back home, they stick to Stephen Harper's targets. In Marrakesh, they called for respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples. Back home, they approved major energy projects impacting those rights. In Bonn, at the 11th hour, they committed to a just transition for fossil fuel sector workers. Yet a year later, nothing budgeted to support Alberta's initiative. This week at COP24 in Poland, will this government simply make more promises they have no intention to keep?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, in Paris, we made a commitment to fight climate change, and at home, we are putting a price on pollution, investing in public transit, helping transition to a clean economy, and taking a number of over 50 measures to help fight climate change. When we committed to enhance First Nations rights, when we came home, we supported a motion to enforce the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. When we make commitments abroad to transition to a clean economy, we're investing to support workers so they can have the jobs not just of today, but tomorrow. Our record is to make commitments on the international stage and then follow through on them at home. To suggest otherwise is misleading, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-La Petite Patrie. Well, Mr. Speaker, they're going to miss their target. In 2015, the Prime Minister portrayed himself as a white knight, saying that he would fight the effects of climate change. But 3 years later, we realize it's just been a fairy tale.
But people want us to play a positive role in protecting the environment. They want a true transition. We have to change course and fast, and it's not by buying pipelines with our money that the PM is going to convince us that he's serious. Will the Liberals work to catch up, or are they going to let down future generations at COP24? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The Honourable Member that during the last campaign the NDP committed to some sort of a cap-and-trade system with absolutely no clarity on how it would make a meaningful difference to reduce emissions across Canada. We campaign on a commitment to grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time. We're putting a price on pollution. We're investing in public transit. We're supporting clean industry. Mr. Speaker, we are implementing over 50 measures that are going to have the impact of taking between 23 and 26 million cars off Canadian roads. Mr. Speaker, I am proud of our record, and I'm proud to be part of a government that for the first time in my life is taking the need to protect our environment seriously.
Yes. The Honourable Member for Montarville.
A frontier that pushes the limits of what is possible. La participation du Canada.
Canada's participation in science and space exploration benefits everyone. Our astronauts are modern-day explorers who are models, who inspire our young people to pursue studies in science, technology, engineering and math. Can the Minister tell the House about Canada's participation on the International Space Station?
Président, je remercie.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for Montarville for his question. This morning, I was in Saint-Hubert with the Canadian Space Agency team, and I am pleased to be able to tell my colleagues that our astronaut David Saint-Jacques' launch was a success.
On the International Space Station until June 2019, where we will conduct science experiments, operate Canadarm2, and new Canadian technologies. David is inspiring the next generation of Canadian explorers and innovators. This is a proud moment for Canada and a proud moment for our space program, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Oshawa.
Mr. Speaker, workers in all sectors of our economy are worried and losing hope as more jobs are lost, like those recently at General Motors in Oshawa. Under this Prime Minister, we've seen the biggest decline in energy investment in 70 years. Excessive regulations and red tape is making investors run for the border. And Mr. Speaker, we found out this week there's no end in sight for steel and aluminum tariffs, and the Liberal carbon tax will just make everything more expensive. Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals end their carbon tax scheme to avoid losing more jobs in Ontario?
Parliamentary Secretary, Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Based on pollution, let's specifically talk about General Motors, because the member opposite knows how difficult this is for Oshawa. The company itself is very supportive of putting a price on pollution. They actually support the fact that we are moving forward in this area. Mr. Speaker, with respects to tariffs, our Prime Minister was very clear with President Trump. We've got to remove these tariffs because it adds more cost and more complexity to both American and Canadian companies. But overall, the economy is doing well. 500,000 jobs have been created, and we'll continue to do more to make sure that more opportunities are created for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Les-Fjords. Mr. Speaker, last Friday the government signed the new free trade agreement with the United States and Mexico. A free trade agreement, Mr. Speaker, and yet our government doesn't seem too concerned about getting rid of aluminum and steel tariffs. There's no reason to have quotas or tariffs. In my region, we create the greenest aluminum in the world, and 85% of our clients are in the States. The planet needs more green aluminum from my magnificent region. When will these tariffs be lifted? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, over the weekend, the Prime Minister signed the side letter on automobiles that provides the Canadian sector with huge protections against American tariffs. Under the new agreement, crucial supply chains will be protected and will improve the wages and works of workers. This agreement benefits hundreds of thousands of Canadians who work in the auto sector and all Canadian workers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, a lack of new pipelines necessary for Canadian oil to reach global markets has created a serious crisis in Alberta. With oil being sold for pennies on the dollar, the No More Pipelines Bill C-69 will be the final nail in the coffin for the industry. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister kill his No More Pipelines bill.
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we understand the struggles that Alberta communities, workers and industry is facing in relation to the price differential, but that's not something new. The reason for that is because the previous government's failed process on regulatory review did not move forward any single pipeline to get our resources to non-U.S. markets. That's what we're trying to change by putting a better regulatory process in place that allows resource development to move forward. Thank you.
Order. The honourable members for Battle River, Crowfoot and Edmonton Western think that they can speak without having the floor. I remind them that isn't the case. The honourable member for order. The honourable member for Edmonton West will come to order. The honourable member for Edmonton Riverbend.
If only he'd understand how disappointed his own city is in him, Mr. Speaker. My province is in crisis. The Alberta energy industry is under attack by this Prime Minister. Albertans have been suffering for years under this Prime Minister's anti-energy policies. He killed Northern Gateway and Energy East, banned tankers, and has failed miserably on Trans Mountain. His No More Pipelines bill, Bill C-69, will be the final nail. Will this minister stand up for Albertan jobs and kill this bill?
Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, while the previous government failed to get the job done, we are taking a decisive action and seeing results. We approved Line 3 replacement project, and we are supporting Keystone XL pipeline. We're helping producers build up the refining capacity here in Canada because we know that means more value for every barrel sold. We announced major tax incentives in the fall economic statement for refineries and upgraders. And we are moving forward on the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion in the right way, responding to the issues.
Order. The honourable member for Jonquière. Mr. Speaker, the NDP knew that passing back-to-work legislation for Canada Post employees was a bad idea. Canada Post does what they want. They have the support of the government, and therefore they have the upper hand. They've slashed employees' accumulated leave and personal leave by using the same tactics as in 2011 that were found to be illegal. Are the Liberals, the so-called progressives, going to let Canada Post undermine the workers? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, from one end to the other of the country, Canadians count on Canada Post and its staff. The work conflict had a very negative impact. There are many organizations and businesses that need Canada Post. Our government acted. It passed a fair and balanced legislation to re-establish this important service for Canadians. Under this legislation, there will be a process that brings both parties back to the table to continue their negotiations with an independent arbitrator. Thank you.
Statistics Canada decided to suspend their plan to collect data on Canadians from their bank and credit records. Liberals are telling Canadians that this was a pilot project when in fact this is entrenched in their own census policy. They knew this and were warned this new scheme would backfire. Instead, they appointed a chief census officer to do their dirty work, undermining the data collecting system and compromising privacy. Now that the minister has failed to restore confidence in Statistics Canada, will he fix the problem? And yes, I will repeat this out of the House.
Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, our government understands how important it is to protect data and the privacy of Canadians. That's why the chief statistician a few weeks ago was very clear in the House and before the Senate as well that he will only proceed when we're dealing with issues around privacy and data protection in a meaningful way. So the member opposite knows this is a pilot project, no data is being collected, and the privacy of Canadians will always be protected, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Treasury Board President said to the RCMP that it wasn't his role to be involved in procurement contracts, and yet he said the opposite last October when he prevented the biggest shipyard from getting a contract. So who's telling the truth? Meanwhile, Coast Guard ships are continuing, but the shipyard is waiting for contracts.
Public safety.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman is referring to materials that deal with an outstanding legal proceeding, and I note that the defendant in that legal proceeding about a week ago said this, and I quote, "We have complete confidence in the court and the court's ability to make decisions as to the relevance of those documents," end of quote. On that advice, Mr. Speaker, it is wise to leave this matter for the court to determine.
The member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The President of the Treasury Board has been telling two contradictory stories about his political interference in the naval ship contract. In October, he told the House that he was only doing his job by ensuring the contract was value for taxpayers. But in January 2016, he told the RCMP that was actually not his job. When will the President of the Treasury Board come clean with Canadians and tell us which story is true?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, when there are legal matters outstanding before the law courts of this country, it is up to the courts to determine the procedure they will follow, the relevance of the evidence, the disclosure of the evidence, and ultimately the final verdict or judgment in the case. And even, as I mentioned just a moment ago, even the defendant in this particular proceeding said this: "We have complete confidence in the court and the court's ability to make decisions as to the relevance of those documents." This House should allow the courts to do their job.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, are the Cabinet Ministers and Liberal MPs single-handedly keeping the courts and the RCMP employed? Mr. Speaker, it was reported that a public servant leaked information on the naval supply ship contract to a prominent Ottawa lobby firm saying, quote, "I got everything, the mother lode." Despite this evidence, the Prime Minister said that Vice Admiral Norman was the one who should end up before the courts. With each passing day, this cover-up smells worse and worse. When will this government come clean and give Canadians the truth about what happened with this contract?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, there's obviously no one that can keep this particular minister or any other member of the House from the drive-by smear tactic. But I would note, Mr. Speaker, that the defense counsel in the case that she's referring to said this some time ago, and I quote, "We have one of the greatest legal systems in the world," end of quote. That's an excellent assessment. Let the courts do their work.
The honourable member for Davenport. Order.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, a bilateral youth mobility agreement was signed between Canada and Portugal and has been eagerly anticipated by all segments of the community. As a representative of the largest Portuguese community in Canada, I have long been an advocate of this agreement and a champion of the benefits that this program will bring to both Canada and Portugal. Can the Minister of Immigration update this House and Canadians on the implementation of the Canada-Portugal Youth Mobility Agreement? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for her excellent question and for her strong advocacy on behalf of the Portuguese-Canadian community. I was so pleased to successfully negotiate the Youth Mobility Agreement with Portugal, which will facilitate youth from both countries to travel, work and study in our joint countries. I'm thrilled to announce that applications for this program open this week. Mr. Speaker, our government believes in expanding the Youth Mobility Program to Portugal, as it will give valuable work experience and perspective to Canadians traveling abroad. And unlike the Conservatives, Mr. Speaker, we believe that the world needs more Canada.
Honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Mr. Speaker, many Canadians have been impacted by the failure of medical devices like meshes and implants. After a whole year of outcry, the Health Minister's weak response is to evaluate whether a registry of who has the devices is the right thing to do. Meanwhile, the US FDA has overhauled their approval process for devices to consider post-surgery outcomes. When will the Health Minister do the same?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Health.
Speaker, we are deeply concerned about the reports of serious issues being faced by Canadians with implanted medical devices. We're assessing the risks, qualities and effectiveness of health products before they're used. We're bringing forward an action plan on medical devices that will strengthen the processes used to approve them, improve oversight once they're approved, and give Canadians more information and more transparency. Unlike the Harper Conservatives who shuttered the Canada's Bureau of Medical Devices in 2010, we're rebuilding this and making sure Canadians are kept safe when they use medical devices. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, On Saturday, I joined more than 14,000 Franco-Ontarians who came out into the streets to express their anger over Doug Ford's policies. It was the biggest demonstration in their history. The movement is continuing and not slowing down. And I have some news for Doug Ford. Knowing how proud Franco-Ontarians are, it won't slow down anytime soon. So with the holiday season approaching, will the Minister of Official Languages offer a gift to Franco-Ontarians and announce the amount that her government plans on investing in Ontario's French University? Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague and all colleagues in the House who participated in that demonstration. As was mentioned, this was the biggest demonstration in the history of French Ontario, and people will remember it. They'll remember how many people came out on December 1st. That being said, Mr. Speaker, every time a government, whether it be federal, municipal, or provincial, has to change legislation on linguistic rights, the only thing they can do is strengthen language rights rather than weaken them. And we will always stand up with Franco-Ontarians.
For Kildonan St. Paul.
Mr. Speaker, every day in this country, Indigenous children are taken away from their families, their communities, and their culture. Across Canada, Indigenous children represent just 7.7% of all kids under 14, yet make up 52.2% of kids in care. In Manitoba, this number is as high as 90%, Mr. Speaker. It's appalling. Can the Minister of Indigenous Services please update this House on the government's work to keep Indigenous families together?
Well, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member from Kildonan St. Paul for the question. On Friday, I was pleased to be joined by First Nations, Inuit and Métis Nation leaders to announce that after comprehensive engagement, we are going forward to introduce co-developed legislation on Indigenous child and family services early in the new year. This legislation should mark a turning point to say no more. No more scooping children. No more ripping apart families. No more lost children who don't know their language, their culture, and their lineage. I hope when the legislation introduces that it will have broad support in this House.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-Lillet, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, last week the Minister of Transport threw in the towel before Via Rail's new fleet contract was even announced. The Quebec government has said that no decision should be made before all bidders have had an opportunity to come forward with their best final offer. Will the Minister at least require that Via Rail allow Bombardier to bring forward its best offer, or will he just allow the jobs to go to California instead of Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Transport. Mr. Speaker, as I said last week, Via is a Crown corporation, a federal Crown corporation. It is arm's length, and it is responsible for granting contracts to renew their rail fleet for the Quebec-Windsor corridor. They're the ones who make that decision. And under our free trade agreement with the European Union, we cannot prefer or insist on a minimum Canadian content. The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, it's only in Quebec that we really protect consumers against banks. But under Bill C-86, the Liberals seem to be protecting the banks by removing any recourse to the Consumer Protection Board. The National Assembly unanimously asked that in Bill C-86, the Quebec legislation continue to apply to banks. Will the 40 Quebec federal Liberals protect consumers from Quebec, or will they choose Bay Street and the big banks? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance.
We understand and respect the jurisdiction of provinces and territories, and that's why when we were dealing with consumer protection, we feel that Canadians deserve the strongest consumer protection, and we consulted with provinces and territories to ensure that our legislation is complementary. It does not override or supersede. This was confirmed to the Bloc members at committee by officials, and we will continue to stand for consumer protections and respect the rights of provinces and territories.
Bravo. The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher-Les Patriotes, Verchères. Mr. Speaker, if it was as benign as that, the National Assembly and the Office de Protection du Consommateur would not be calling on Ottawa to back down. This bill creates a legal vacuum, and it looks like it was written so that a client that has been deceived by a bank would have to take that bank all the way to the Supreme Court to get his money back. If the government really wants a legislation to not weaken the consumer's protection, why has it been written as if the bank should win? Why are they not including in the bill that Quebec legislation would continue to apply?
Again, as confirmed at committee by officials, our legislation was done in consultation with provinces and territories to ensure that the highest levels of consumer protection are upheld. Our legislation is complementary and will ensure that those protections in the provinces and territories are upheld. And we will continue to consult and make sure that consumers, when dealing with banks, are protected. Hear, hear.
Député de Beauce.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. The Prime Minister stated over the weekend that social impact studies have to be made when construction workers go and work in rural regions. And yet, the government is about to sign, with no debate, a UN treaty to normalize mass migration. The government has to preserve our sovereignty and not sign that agreement. Can the Prime Minister tell us why he is so worried about the social impact of Canadian workers compared to migrants from other countries? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, there have been unprecedented numbers of women and children who have been displaced throughout the world because of war and persecution.
Position on the global compact. This is the first time that the international community has worked together to develop a comprehensive set of principles to better manage this phenomenon. It is disappointing to see the Conservatives and the member opposite engage in peddling rebel media conspiracy theories while we work with the international community to protect our robust immigration system.
Remind our members to the minister to direct their comments to not use the personal names of members in the House. L'honorable député de
The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Patrie is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, there was consultation amongst the parties, and if you seek it, you will find there is unanimous consent for the following motion. Seconded for the member for Edmonton Strathcona, that the House call on the Prime Minister and the Minister of the Environment to put forth the following priorities during the COP24 meeting on climate change. A climate plan of action with a focus on reconciliation, robust commitments to the Paris Accord, which will help Canada meet its greenhouse gas emission targets, investment in a transition to a clean economy which leaves no worker behind, increased accountability in the fight for climate change, and including human health in Canada's climate commitments. The honourable member does not have unanimous consent. Tabling of documents.
The Honourable Government House Leader.